This is IAT355 Visual Analytics Lecture 9.3, where we're continuing our conversation about trees and visual representations of trees. As the title says, we've already covered node link representations. Now what we're going to do is talk about space filling or enclosure-based representations, where an enclosing polygon, typically a rectangle, is used to indicate the relationship, the hierarchical relationship. Okay, so hierarchies are often represented as trees, and trees are once again directed acyclic graphs. That is to say, nodes are connected to other nodes via links, and in a tree you cannot trace a path from one node to another and back to itself through any path throughout the tree. There are three main representation schemes. We've talked about node link representations. We're now going to be talking about space filling representations, where two-dimensional space is used as an important means of depicting something interesting about what's going on in the representation. And then after this, we'll talk about matrix representations. So here are, once again, our node link examples. We had the simplest tree up here on the left with circle nodes and links represented as lines joining those circles. Over here is the space tree thing, which reallocates space when you click on a node and expand it. Down on the right is the cone tree, the variation on cone tree, which has a little bit more 3D affordances, a little bit more readable. And over on the bottom left here is the hyperbolic tree. All three of these representations are interactive, enabling the user to pursue queries about what's going on in the hierarchy. And each of these, some better than others, enables the user to understand the hierarchy and the relationships among the nodes. So one thing that node link diagrams are built for is to enable users to understand the structure or the hierarchy, but it can be difficult to encode more variables about data cases. That is to say, some more information per node might be hard to get across in these node link representations. Some of the things that you sometimes see is nodes that have shape, color, and size encodings to tell you something about what's going on in the nodes. And certainly color would be okay for representing some kind of categorical variable, say what manufacturer of cereal or something, let's say, shape might, a limited number of shapes, say 4 or 5, might represent another categorical variable, say the kind of operation that's going on in that particular node. And size can sometimes be used, but the problem is that if you start varying the size of nodes too much, what happens is as you expand a node, you just simply run out of space for the rest of the graph. And the bigger the node is, the more likely it is to obscure the representation of the edges that are connected to it. So each of those things has, you can put that information in individual nodes, that visual information of shape, size, and color, but they quickly clash with the basic node link structure. So another approach is to essentially trade away the idea of representing nodes as individual blobs on the screen and instead represent nodes a little bit more succinctly as rectangular areas. And so let's show how that works. So the space filling representation, the concept here is that each item occupies a certain amount of area. And the example down below is a very simplified variation of that. What goes on is that each item represents an area and children are contained under a parent. The example below shows kind of a halfway version of this thing, where there's a node link diagram of a tree on the left, right? There's the root here, 3 child nodes, and 8 grandchild nodes. And over here on the right, we have the total area, the horizontal extent only, not area, representing the root. And then there are 3 child nodes, and the 3 plus 3 plus 2 grandchild nodes that are located there. And the horizontal extent of each of these things is associated with some size parameter. And in this case, the width of the box displays the node size. And that can be very important information. In this case, what we're doing on the sort of box-shaped thing on the right is a kind of a hybrid structure where the horizontal extent is used to depict size and the vertical dimension is used to depict level in the tree from root down to leaves. A sort of a completion of that idea is this thing called TreeMap, which starts off with taking that idea and applying it to 2 dimensions, and essentially takes a rectangular area that you pre-allocate and subdivides and subdivides and subdivides that rectangular area to depict levels of the hierarchy and nodes, child nodes, grandchild nodes. So this was first developed by Schneiderman and Johnson and published in Visualization 1991. And the concept is that children are drawn inside the parent. In the previous example, the children were drawn below the parent. The current example, the examples going forward, children are inside parent. And basically, the idea is to take the rectangular area, chop it up according to the number of child nodes there are. So the root accounts for everything. And then that entire root area is chopped horizontally to have child nodes. And then each of those child nodes is chopped independently vertically to show grandchild nodes. And each of those grandchild nodes is further chopped horizontally to show great-grandchild nodes, and so on. The thing that's important about this is the area of those rectangles encodes some other variable of data items that you care about, some quantitative value that's important to the concept that you're trying to depict. So here's a straightforward example from Johnson and Schneiderman's paper. Here is a file system. The total area here is representative of all the disk space taken up by files in the file system. And then let's say this is the person's home folder, and then there are a bunch of horizontal slices, some very, very thin, but some also very large. And those horizontal slices are individual folders. And then within each of these folders, there's a bunch of vertical slices, some comparatively thick, some very thick, like this one over here on the right, and some very thin. And what that means is that, there's some files or folders, whatever they are, that are very big, and some other things that are very small. Also, color is used in this thing to depict what type the file is. Because this was done a number of years ago, it's likely that these big things are actually executables. There's no images or videos in this file system. And the size of this thing's probably intended to depict is probably 50 megabytes or something, not very large at all. But it gets the idea across. Take space, cut it up into smaller pieces. And the whole concept is that the entirety of the space, in this case on the disk, is cut up into smaller pieces, and that is corresponds to the amount of space each individual file or all the files in an individual folder take up on the disk. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to do a brief demo. It's not about file systems. This is about something else, and it's about causes of death of those over the age of 65, things like heart disease and so on and so forth. So let's show that right now. Okay, so here it is. This is a tree map of the causes of death of folks over the age of 65. It's a bit of a macabre topic, but it is interesting because what this is about is how trends of, late life causes of death have improved or gotten worse over time. So the data is about causes of death as measured in 1998, okay? And we can see that here. Sorry, I'm pointing at the wrong thing. 1998, all right? And the thing being measured and shown as color, first off, the quantity is being transmitted to the size of each of these individual items. And as you can see, this TreeMap application is interactive. And you see a pop-up tooltip telling you what's in this box. And the size of the box indicates the number of people who have died from this cause. And the color is used to indicate whether things have improved, that is to say less people dying of this disease, or gotten worse, which is to say more people dying of this disease. And the comparator is from 1981, so pretty much almost 2 decades worth of information is being depicted here. It's not an accumulation of year after year, it's just those 2 dates and causes of death. It turns out that the diagnostic process has remained fairly stable, so it is comparable. So here, green means things have improved, and one of the things that has improved over those 2 preceding decades, from 20 to 40 years ago, has been an improvement in the domain of heart disease, and that is shown here. So at the top level, we see the name of the data set, and this is deaths per 100,000, right? And within that is cardiovascular disease. And cardiovascular disease takes up, I would say, roughly about 40% of the entire area here. So the entire area, this is everybody. And over here on the left, the top level category below everyone is cardiovascular disease. Over here is cancer. And this is other. Here is COPD, that is congested breathing, pneumonia and influenza, infectious and parasitic diseases, things like that. But anyway, the biggest cause of death has been and still is heart disease, and this indicates where the numbers are at. And the green indicates that there's been an improvement, and that's due to things like the widespread uptake of statin medicines, which address cholesterol and reduce cholesterol in many people, and other campaigns to help encourage people have healthy hearts, also encouraging exercise and all sorts of things. So that's improved. There's been a nationwide campaign for a long time to address that, worldwide campaign really. And so acute myocardial infarction, that means heart attack, old infarction, that was second or third heart attack essentially. Other diseases, that hasn't changed much. Cerebral thrombosis, that's stroke. So this is in the domain of stroke down here. All sorts of things going wrong, that you don't want to have. Things have generally improved. The only thing that hasn't improved is hypertension, that has apparently increased over those 20 years. Things that have gotten worse is breathing problems, COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. That's your breathing getting worse due to your lungs getting blocked up. This purple thing here, I think this is a new diagnosis, and so that's something that has become much more salient in the public health domain, and so that's coded purple because that's new to the data set, whereas everything else is not new. It's causes of death that have been around for a while. So anyway, this thing kind of really gives you a clear idea of what it is, that is the layout of bad stuff going on in terms of health, and how things have changed over time. So that's the TreeMap demo, and so what that thing did is takes a data set and then maps color to the change over 20 years, maps size to the number of people, and then allocates the total amount of space and chops it up first vertically, then horizontally, and so on and so forth, with a little bit of judicious algorithms to make the thing not have so many tall, thin rectangles, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So the basic concept, particularly as shown in the first still slide on this thing with the file system, is the draw concept is you take the entire data set, change the and this is a recursive function, change the orientation from whatever your parent was, from horizontal to vertical or from vertical to horizontal, read all the stuff that you've got, make a rectangle for each, scaled to size, and then draw rectangles in the space that you have allocated to yourself of the appropriate size and color. And then for each directory, if this was directories, still make a recursive call to draw all the content of that directory in the small size that you've allocated for this individual item. So all of that is within this for loop. So that's the basic idea. The drawback with this is that you end up with long, thin slices, but we'll talk about that later on. So one of the little concerns that you no doubt noticed in that demo is sometimes the framing is the thing that tells you about what's going on, and it's a little hard to read. Also, the containment relationship is not so clear, and so you could instead spend a little bit of ink or pixels on putting some more decorative borders around things for the purposes of really depicting the hierarchical relationship. So these two tree maps we're showing here are the same tree map, as you can probably see, but the one on the left is using all the space. It's, you know, an exact mapping from space to pixels. On the right, there's this kind of rounded border being drawn, and the border takes up space, and that's, you know, pixels that you're spending in order to depict the hierarchy more directly. And so this gets to one of the issues with tree maps, is that they are not necessarily so strong at being able to depict hierarchy, but they are good at depicting the quantities within that hierarchy that contribute to some, you know, quantitative value of interest that you really care about. So the applications for this kind of stuff is that you can use TreeMap for a variety of domains. So one of the, you know, sort of the first use of this thing was to depict file and directory structures, to, you know, answer the question you're always asking once your disk gets full, is what's hogging all my disk? You could use this for statistics, for sports, for software, and as we've just shown, for examining trends over time, that where each of those trends that you're interested in has some kind of quantitative thing that you're interested in. That being said, what it's really good for is possibly depicting changes from 2 points, not, say, a trend line where there's many, many samples along the timeline. Probably tree maps are, I haven't seen them used for that, so they're not very good for it. So what I'm going to show you now is another older example. This is from a system called CSys that was developed a number of years ago at Bell Labs. It is a software metrics visualization system, and it uses a tree map-like visualization to present different software metrics. And what it does is it's very similar to the file system viewer in terms of its starting concept, read all the files. But in this case, what it's doing is reading all the files of a software repository. And we're talking millions of lines of code for this thing. And what it displays is size of the, you know, the code base, and recent development, changes that have been made, high fix rates, that is to say, you know, the software repository isn't fixed, is not static, but it's continuing to be maintained and upgraded and so on and so forth. And so fix rates is you fix a bug, you think you fixed it, and somebody else fixes that bug fix, which happens now and then. Even this thing I'm using today, OBS, had a bug fix and a bug fix in its update recently. The other thing it can show is history and growth, but its primary thing is to depict size and where changes have happened. So here is the CSys sample. And these are subsystems in a software system, and they are labeled in this example with letters indicating, you know, what software module or segment is going on. And each rectangle represents non-comment source code in a subsystem and in a software subsystem. So here's subsystem A, B, and C. And area means the size, the total lines of code in that module. And so here they all are. You know, they have the uppercase letters and lowercase letters depicting module names. And really, that's more or less so the people who built this thing don't have to kind of reveal the inner structure of their proprietary code. And basically what the gray thing is indicating, color is, non-gray is indicating the total lines of code, whereas gray is indicating new code in this release. And there's a little size bar indicating, what colors corresponded to what actual size in terms of lines of code or in the software repository. And there's also a spot on the lower left to be a place for inquiries that you make on the software to give you the information you're looking for. So this second sample is a little bit more focused on identifying in the software repository where good things and maybe not so good things are happening. So this is new code in this release, and these colored swatches are indicating where their new code is, and the gray stuff indicates added functionality, and the gray bars that are tall are indicating bug fixes. And so there are some areas where there are bug fixes upon bug fixes, like over here in module K. And so the individual bars here also represent individual directories in the subsystem. So this is a really big software repository. So my point here is not so much, let's learn how this thing works and focus so much on the details. It's that the kind of the visualization substrate of boxes and sub-boxes and sub-sub-boxes can be used and reused in a way to do visualizations where the overall concept of the hierarchy it is depicted, and then within appropriate elements that you care about of them in the hierarchy, you can do other rendering ideas. So this thing's inspired by TreeMap, but then extends the TreeMap in a particular way to tell you more about what's going on, and the representation switches from being about mapping area to the topic of interest to mapping different things. Okay, so let's move forward. Here's a more recent example. This is 2017 car sales, and you can see where I got this. This is a screenshot that I took of the thing at AmCharts. DataViz tip 27 charts type TreeMap, and this is depicting car sales in the US in 2017, and it takes the standard a newer TreeMap approach of, instead of cutting horizontally then horizontally within that, because this is a kind of a broad hierarchy, where there are a bunch of car manufacturers, and then below that are a bunch of models of automobiles. So what this is doing is instead taking a horizontal slice first, and then within that space taking a single vertical slice to put the next larger items, and then within the remaining space taking a single horizontal slice to put the next 2 or 3, whatever the appropriate size is. So vertical, horizontal, vertical, and then horizontal. So the algorithm here isn't exactly, just a straightforward horizontal, then vertical, then horizontal thing. There's more subtlety in the way space is being cut up. The other thing that's interesting that's going on in here is that it is showing the car brands, including their logos, in the background. And for some of these, they're easy to read because the contrast is good enough, particularly the Ford one's easy to read, whereas down here, this is Acura, I guess. It's a little hard to read. And down here, this is Infinity, and I forget what this purple one is. I think this is Mitsubishi or something like that. And this is other. This is everyone else: Volvo, Land Rover, Tesla, Mini, etc. The bunch of smaller manufacturers that taking up the space to indicate, their relative size. I would anticipate actually Tesla ending up being somewhat bigger over time than many of these other manufacturers, mainly because Tesla's got a really good product in terms of the way their electrical system works. And environmental concerns. So Ford, the related brands to Ford are also shown here. There's Lincoln in here somewhere. I've forgotten where it's got to. And so this is actually Chevrolet, not just General Motors, because GMC is here, and Pontiac is here. So anyway, so that's another indicator, and this thing is an example of what you would more commonly see sort of online is comparatively shallow hierarchies, and also shallow hierarchies that don't necessarily change too much. So what tree maps are good for is they're a good representation of two attributes beyond a node link. Color, because you get big color swatches typically, but not necessarily always, and area. And now area is the thing that TreeMap is intended to do, so it's really good at representing that. However, it's not so good at representing structure. And the preceding example is an example of getting away with representing structure Instead of having a frame that has a title on it, what it's using is doing a kind of a background wash and color together to indicate that this is, one node in a hierarchy, and then within that hierarchy were a bunch of individual car models. So anyway, there are a number of ways you can get at those concerns of representing structure, not just by spatial subdivision. This little quiz question, which I'm not going to stop for an answer for, asks a little puzzle question. What happens if the tree that you're representing is a balanced, say, binary tree, that it's a perfectly balanced tree, each node has 2 child nodes, and each of those nodes has 2 child nodes, down to a depth of, say, 3 or 4, what do you get? And I'll pause for a sec. So what you get, if you were to do that, is that what you would get is you'd end up with a bunch of boxes that are all of equal size, right? The vertical subdivision would divide in 2, and then the horizontal subdivision would divide that into at equal points on both sides. And so you have this recursive subdivision into a whole, a power of 2 equally sized boxes, which is kind of pointless from a visualization point of view. The other thing that can happen particularly with the standard algorithm, the starting algorithm as it were, is you get long-thin aspect ratios. We've seen some examples of that. Also, borders can help on smaller trees, but as you are adding elements and taking up pixels to create border elements, you're taking those pixels away from the space allocation process. So that's something that is of concern. So that wraps up lecture 9.3, where we've been talking about space filling and enclosure as the depiction method. And what we'll do next is talk about ways to address the concerns of long, thin rectangles and other such concerns for tree maps.